Climate change is causing more extreme storms, heavier rainfall, wildfires, and agricultural crises around the world. But it's not the first time humans have been confronted with a changing planet. In a new paper, LSU researchers detail examples of how humans have adapted in the past. WWNO's Tegan Wendland talked with Emeritus Professor of Oceanography and Coastal Sciences John Day about what we can learn by looking back at human history.
So how did you even go about doing this study? It's basically a lit review on the entire history of human civilization.
It is a literature review of a lot of different papers, but it's bringing together methodologies from the ecological sciences about resource scarcity, because that's what biology is all about, and also from civilizations of the past, which the archaeologists bring to us, bringing those together and looking at what happened and bringing a fresh interpretation. You know, people in the past might have said it was about different religious groups fighting or things like that, showing that the idea of resource scarcity is central to the success or failure of societies.
This is not the first time the climate has changed, and climate change deniers often cite that fact in arguing that climate change now has not been caused by humans. So what do we know about major climatic shifts in the past? What were some of the causes for warming and ice ages, and how did humans adapt then?
Well, the major cause for ice ages and ending ice ages is this orbital irregularity of the Earth relative to the sun. And that for the last million years, we've had about 10 ice ages, and that's what caused that. Then volcanic eruptions cool the atmosphere because it loads a lot of particulate matter, and that can lead to a cooling climate and changes in rainfall, and that's led to real problems in the past. What characterizes the modern era of climate change now is the rapidity of that change. For instance, from the height of the ice age about 15,000 years ago until the present, the climate warmed by about 8 degrees Celsius. That, in other words, in about 10,000 years, temperature went up by 8 degrees. We've increased the temperature by a degree Celsius in 1 century. Mm-hmm. So it's the rate of change and the fact that it's truly global in scope.
Sure, and that sort of started with the advent of agriculture and has risen precipitously since then.
Yeah, it has risen precipitously, but the recent changes are even more precipitous.
What kind of parallels do you see between challenges humans have faced in the past and the challenges that we face today?
When resources are abundant, people do well, and when resources become scarce, things like violence increases, disease, famine, and you see that over and over. For instance, the Native American tribes in the Southwest, when they had these decades-long droughts, you can see indications in the skeletons of people who were left of disease and violence. And I think if we don't think about this and carefully plan for it, those same kinds of things might happen.
I mean, in some cases, they already are. Much of the conflict playing out in the world right now, like the current migrant crisis, for example, is related to natural resources and mirrors conflicts that you've laid out in your paper.
Yeah, I mean, the Syrian civil war right now is related to a drought that drove farmers. Syria used to be a net exporter of food, and because of this really extended drought, these farms failed, and that moved. The farmers migrated into cities and came into conflict with people that they normally wouldn't have come into conflict with, and that's how that got started, really.
Looking back at the entire history of human civilization, what's going to happen next?
Well, resources are going to get scarce, and I think there are 2 different major pathways. One is a pathway towards more reactionary government, repression, putting groups, just like immigrants or people of color, you put them in a different category and you dehumanize them. And once you dehumanize them, you can treat them badly. Or we can think of how we can come together as a human society and learn to live on less, and realize that we can be just as happy, as many studies have shown that people in places like Mexico and Brazil and other countries are just as happy as people who live in the U.S. or Europe.
Thank you so much, John Day, LSU Oceanography professor.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.